Hello. Hello to any replay viewers. Hello to any live viewers. Welcome to today's Dab Chat. Thanks for joining me. And how are you all? I wanted to open by talking about some different types of racism, because the word racism itself is a bit abstract, but there's some racist actions and outcomes we can break it down into, some of which explain quite a lot of death that's happening at the moment. Essentially a type of democide, i.e. concerted neglect at the hands of the federal government to have a federal response to a pandemic that is disproportionately killing African Americans and Hispanic Americans. So what category would that fall under? Let's have a look. If we've got conscious racially motivated neglect, that's when the Trump administration knows that African Americans are disproportionately being affected, but fails to take action, hoping that Democratic governors will be blamed for the deaths, and that the white people who die will be collateral damage, aside from the Black people whose deaths they don't care about because they're racist. Then we have unconscious racism, where you have unconscious racially motivated neglect. So officials who might participate in the Trump administration's failure to devise a national testing strategy, or to organize resources to be distributed to health professionals in an appropriate time frame, to employ the Defense Production Act to ramp up domestic production of masks and gowns and N95 masks, etc. Some of the people doing that might be unconsciously racist. And there's a lot of medical neglect in general that falls into this unconscious racially motivated neglect category that would explain outcomes such as Black babies are 3 times more likely to die under the care of a white doctor than they are to die under the care of a Black doctor. And this is a conclusion found by researchers who couldn't directly pronounce on the cause, but we can only speculate why it is that after analyzing data from the births of over 1 million children in Florida over the years from 1992 to 2005, that they would find this robust, statistically significant finding that Black babies were more likely to die under the care of white doctors, and that it was such a significant amount, 300% effectively more likely to die, and that this likelihood was more pronounced when a Black child had more complicating medical conditions, or also when there were more Black babies born in a hospital at a particular time. Oh, I've missed some comments. Let's have a look. We have Jeff, Alan, Craig. Yes, green screen, because if I'm trying to mix the green screen and my normal background, it's going to get fuzzy using the whiteboard. So when I finish using the whiteboard, we'll switch to the beautiful artificial home that I like to project for a soothing contrast to the content of my broadcast, which is typically about the US devolving into fascism and steps that we can take to try and oppose the fascist overtaking of the United States of America, and consequently the negative fallout for the rest of the world. So yes, unfortunately, there would seem to be a lot of medical professionals who fall into this category of, and when I say medical professionals, sorry, I should be more specific, white medical professionals who are unfortunately unconsciously, or consciously, but hopefully unconsciously, although the outcomes are still the same, whether you consciously or unconsciously medically neglect someone, there's just more malice involved if it's conscious. But yes, Black children are more likely to die under the attendance of a white physician. Then we have here an important category of racially motivated theft. So conscious racially motivated theft, such as when officials in former governments devised redlining, which is to say government-backed loans were allowed to apply to certain districts and were not allowed to be issued to people who lived in the red line districts, which were predominantly Black neighborhoods. So they knew where Black people lived and they colored them in red so that they couldn't qualify for these special loans. That was conscious racism. And it was theft because Black people also pay taxes. Black people also contribute to the government, and they have just as much right as white people to a share of federal benefits. But time and time again, it's been quite difficult to force governments to give Black taxpayers a fair share of benefits derived from a government that is supported through the paying of taxes, and is presumably justified to some people on the basis of a false belief that Black Americans don't pay taxes. They do, and they are habitually ripped off over time. And then conscious racially motivated theft can be compounded and exacerbated by unconscious racially motivated theft, which is when that type of pattern of stealing gets just so institutionalized, people don't even question it anymore. There may not need to be any longer a conscious element, but unconsciously people are propagating a pattern of theft from African Americans. Thank you, Mr. Ed. I'm grateful for your positive attention and love. So yes, I just wanted to consider those terms, to introduce them to the lexicon, because racism itself can seem so inadequate and so alienating sometimes. You see people reject the term white privilege, but my friend from Politidope, I said I wanted to meme his remarks because they were good. So Matt Rogers of Politidope, the Twitter account, the popular Twitter account, who is now running for a Virginian state Senate seat, wrote, "White privilege doesn't mean that white people don't have struggles, don't have struggles in their lives. It means that their skin color doesn't compound them. So white people can still have problems. You needn't feel that the concept of white privilege negates the existence of your problems." Unfortunately, psychologists have conducted studies that, well, one psychologist has conducted a study illustrating that when groups of people were taught about white privilege, it didn't really elevate the levels of sympathy for Black people, because people who are more progressive had a higher degree of sympathy towards Black people as a baseline before the white privilege class commenced. And the conservative, more Republican-minded people who attended the class, their level of sympathy for Black people didn't change. It was resistant to a class on white privilege. But what did happen was the more progressive people's sympathy for poor white people declined. So, yes, just the phrase white privilege, we need to persevere with educating people, but we may need to tweak it a little bit to help people understand that it's a compounding factor. We're not saying all white people are privileged or elite. Certainly the extent of white poverty is often hidden from the public by people who seem motivated by a white supremacist bias to pretend that there's no such thing as white poverty and that poverty is solely the province of Black Americans and can be attributable to all of the racist assumptions about character that feed and sustain racism. Thank you, Mr. Ed. All right, so I think we're done with the whiteboard for now, unless anybody else has any examples of racism for us to debate which category they might belong to. Yes, no, no. Let's see. Let us go and resurrect this green screen and have a nice, welcoming family home. I'm sorry if the illusion is too startling a change. I hope it's fine. Wow, that really seems to light up my face a bit more. I guess the reflectiveness is increased. So yes, here's my theme for the day, just on a personal level. Someone posted on Twitter, periodic Twitter reminder, you do not have to attend every fight to which you are invited. And that's going to be my troll approach today. I don't have to attend every fight that I'm invited to. How's that? Yes. little bit fuzzy? All right, so let's see. We'll go to Twitter because there is some exciting developments in that. Well, Michael Flynn has been knocked back by a federal appeals court. And yeah, let's have a look. Messages. All right, so the majority of the federal court, 3-judge majority, defends U.S. District Judge Sullivan's impartiality. You've just been letting the trolls have their way. That's nice. It's when they become very intrusive, I guess, that we're more motivated to kick them off. All right. Is that too dark or is that okay? So the judge defends, the majority of judges in this hearing defend Judge Sullivan's impartiality towards Michael Flynn, because Michael Flynn had complained about the judge's remark, arguably, you sold your country out. And they note that Michael Flynn made that comment at a hearing where Flynn adhered to his guilty plea. So he was saying, yes, I did these things, I'm guilty. And the judge said, well, arguably, you sold your country out. I can't make any guarantees, said Judge Sullivan, but I'm not hiding my disgust, my disdain for this criminal offense. Hypothetically, could he have been charged with treason? The judge asked the prosecutor and said, I was just trying to determine the benefit of and the generosity of the government in bestowing a benefit, i.e. leniency, on Mr. Flynn. I'm not suggesting he committed treason. So Michael Flynn's been trying to, have the court of public opinion, as determined by magats, influence judges. And the thing is, what magats believe about Michael Flynn and his innocence and his patriotism and his adoration of Trump, who's a god, and his proximity to this always innocent, always all-powerful, venerable being, doesn't always play out in a court where the judges haven't been appointed necessarily by Trump or don't feel that they owe it to Trump to overturn their own systems of ethics and principles. So next message I'm moving on to is Biden, who's going to be in Pennsylvania today with a message that Trump's failure to call on his own supporters to stop acting as an armed militia in this country shows you how weak he is. Does anyone believe there will be less violence in America if Donald Trump is reelected? Now, in counties where Trump won in 2016, there was a sharp uptick in racially motivated hate crimes. So no, I don't think sensible people would believe that there will be a drop in violence in America if Donald Trump is reelected. It's hard because it's likely there'll be violence in any case because Trump has been assiduously cultivating a violent attitude on the part of his followers, whom he inflames with violent rhetoric on Twitter. So much so that Kamala Harris for a long time has been advocating for Twitter to ban him from the platform. Such is the level of stochastic terrorism that he inflicts on this great nation. When he says things like, things are going to be rigged. He said that prior to the 2016 election, and they were, to a degree, rigged in his favor, in that his campaign team, with his knowledge, was colluding with Russian intelligence officers to micro-target African-American voters to suppress their vote, targeting Bernie Sanders supporters to make them so angry against Hillary Clinton and to feel so aggravated that Bernie Sanders had been cheated of the primary in which Hillary Clinton decisively won by millions of primary votes, that they would punish Hillary Clinton for her audacity to have beaten Bernie Sanders so decisively by not voting for her and potentially even voting for Trump. And those people are still visible even now, some of them. I'm sure their numbers have lessened because of the fact that Donald Trump's presidency is no longer rhetorical, imaginary. It's very real, and there's been some very real harms caused to a lot of people. Some enthusiasts for Sanders and some enthusiasts for anarchy and destruction will not acknowledge the harm done to people, and they will instead say, well, maybe it'll be better this time if we vote Trump in again, and then things will get really worse, and then people will want Bernie Sanders if things get so much worse. Most people feel like they cannot deal with things getting much worse, and people are making plans to leave the country if Donald Trump wins a second term, or just really despairing of what life would be like under a fascist who might not kill everyone, but he's not going to help. He's not going to go out of his way to help America. And when he's the person in charge of helping America, that failure has increasingly severe consequences. Somebody pointed out potentially 6 million people could die of the pandemic. Millions of people could lose their homes. And the Republican Party could rejoice in an effectively serfed population, like a feudal society where people are so vulnerable and so deprived of political power that they have to accept whatever conditions that their corporate overlords deem they accept. No access to healthcare, be so desperate for money that you'll work shifts all hours, you'll have 4 jobs, you'll do whatever it is that they need you to do, and you won't complain, and you'll be quiet to not make trouble because you don't want to jeopardize your employment when there are already so many unemployed. And I've seen people making a great point about how many people are unemployed at present, which is that it's voluntary because there's a lot of work that needs doing. And the federal government is prepared to spend trillions of dollars of your money in buying corporate bonds as a type of campaign donation to Trump to make the stock exchange stay afloat, stay enthusiastic, stay completely detached from the reality of the problems affecting the economy, which is that a lot of jobs aren't coming back. Employers are realizing that the path to economic recovery is going to be hampered by the continuing unfolding of the coronavirus. And no, hydroxychloroquine doesn't cure it. Neither does the MyPillow guy's oleandrin substance. Nor can Trump be believed if he tries to circumvent phase 3 trials of vaccine candidates to say, guess what? I, Donald Trump, your Messiah and your King and your God, have expedited with my magical powers this vaccine because I've deemed it unnecessary to have phase 3 safety and efficacy trials. So you're all going to have it now. And people are going to be like, no, even normal people who would accept a normal vaccine will be much more suspicious of a vaccine that has been purposefully expedited by Donald Trump to try and fulfill a campaign promise that he can do anything he wants if he waves his tiny hands. Yes, the good thing is it's actually, there are very noisy progressives on social media, but most Bernie Sanders supporters, I think it's still pretty high, like 86%, are intending to vote for Joe Biden. So I know it's so tempting to generalize about them, but I should make sure I don't do that because it's actually just a very small, noisy subset of obdurate Sanders supporters. And I'm sure they were used to great political effect. In 2016, Trump was giving polling data obtained by the GOP. And the GOP don't just survey GOP supporters. They pay for polling data of people who answers the phone, and they record who's a Democrat and a Bernie Sanders supporter or a Clinton supporter. Paul Manafort handed over that information about all the voters that they'd talked to in key battleground districts, key electoral college districts, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, states that Trump won by very small margins, totaling 77,000 votes in total for those 3 states, which those 3 states gave him the electoral college win. And yes, Black Americans would remember the Tuskegee experiment where researchers who began the experiment when syphilis was not well understood. But they didn't tell the black men they enrolled in the subject that they had syphilis. So that was the first unethical step that they took. Then, subsequently, penicillin was discovered to be a cure for syphilis, and they refrained from administering this cure to Black American men out of this perverse desire to continue researching the longitudinal effects of this disease on these men whom they hadn't honestly disclosed that they had syphilis. So they let the men continue to infect families and sexual partners and live these lives with a disease that was treatable, that had a cure, and they just let. Do you know what happens with untreated syphilis over time? They even stopped these men from joining the army, or they would tell army recruiters, no, not these guys. Don't ask them. Don't allow them to join the army, because they knew that in the army, the men would have received a proper diagnosis and penicillin to just cure the syphilis and make it go away. They sacrificed the lives of these Black, poor, relatively undereducated American men because Black Americans were less than human, because the worth of their lives and the value of their lives was not taken seriously. So in that whiteboard I had before, where we looked at different types of racism, these people might have told themselves that they weren't being racist. So that would make it a very grey issue, because it's so racist what they did. It discounts the dignity and humanity of those Black men. It's such a violation of their human rights that you could say, how could they have been possibly unconscious of that racism? So let's put it in the category of conscious, willful, racially motivated neglect, and conscious, racially motivated theft of life and well-being. Yes, very sadistic science, very sadistic racial science, racist science. Some branches of science have been very much given over to the practice of racism. Yes, syphilis does kill you if left untreated, and can also leave you with delirium tremens and, brain dysfunction, etc. Alan's saying that he remembers verge, and I don't know what verge stands for. Paul said they miss each other. I'm good, Paul. The Constitution provides for due process in court and not in the form of public opinion. True, but when klepto-fascists are corrupting things, then they circumvent the law as much as they can. So Roger Stone's commutation of sentence, the fact that Paul Manafort was released from jail, the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell is the only prisoner in the jail she's in to have been allowed a face-to-face meeting with an attorney. Klepto-fascists abuse the rule of law because laws apply to other people and they don't apply to the people in power, when the klepto-fascist people have worked very hard to undermine all systems of checks and balances. So we can't talk about the law entirely the same way, because a lot of the guarantees that justice will at least be an object to strive for, that's gone. You have an attorney general in William Barr, who's probably the most unrepentant criminal in the country at present. His harms are manifold and extensive. Okay, now let's go back to Twitter. So yes, Trump demonized caravans of peaceful asylum seekers at the border to galvanize his base in 2018, but the Democrats still won a decisive blue wave victory, flipping many Republican seats in the House. And there were more vulnerable Democrats up for re-election in 2018, But for this election in 2020, there's more vulnerable Republican senators up for re-election. So it's very possible that Dems could take control of the House. They have to turn out not just to vote for Biden. They have to appreciate that there's more than one branch of government. And you cannot rely on a president to be like a messiah who fixes everything. A president works more effectively in concert with a cooperative House, cooperative Senate, a judicial branch that's not actively opposed to, out of hyperpartisanship, to the actions of a president from the opposite political party. And lately I've been reading out loud extracts from the George Washington's farewell address to the American people. And the predictions from that speech are so remarkable that I might share some with you soon. But it describes party passions and how when party passions rise significantly, it places America in a more vulnerable position, because then manipulative people can take advantage of that logical weakness. If you're so loyal to your party, you don't engage with evidence anymore. You only see through the lens of your party loyalties, then you're vulnerable to outside corruption and domestic corruption, all of which has happened under Trump. And it's not just this abstract concept of corruption, it's very real and ongoing and escalating harm to the American people, but particularly the most marginalized and vulnerable communities. So Trump, we can't just laugh at him. Black Americans have been dying. Hispanic Americans have been dying. White Americans have been dying, but to a lesser extent, at a proportional statistical level. All right. A criticism of the media. If the media keeps saying, well, Trump's running on law and order, like the New York Times, which I've often urged people to cancel their subscription for, because the New York Times is very guilty of this false equivalent strategy that gives an unfair advantage to Trump, who's a liar. And if you have to just weigh things up equally without reporting consistently which one is just abjectly untrue, then you're doing a disservice to the public. So yes, media like the Times, argues Norman Ornstein, who is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and a contributing editor for The Atlantic, and I think he was an ethics lawyer under the Obama administration. So media like the Times that accept in both headlines and stories that Trump is running on law and order are digging the graves of a free press. Because law and order without the rule of law is neither law nor order. Any news organization that says Trump is running on law and order is carrying propaganda rather than reporting. He is the candidate of corruption, lawlessness, arbitrary violence, and civil breakdown. So that's in a piece by Greg Sargent, who is probably one of my favorite journalists on Twitter, sizable presence on Twitter. I recommend you follow him. His account is at the Plumline GS. GS are his initials. He's Greg Sargent, Sargent, the Plumline. Why his name is the Plumline, I don't know. But yes, it's analyzing Trump's vile tweet storm, revealing the ugly core of his law and order claims. Wow, Black Americans is trending in the United States. Why is that trending? Is it because of what Trump's been tweeting? Oh, it's also because Adele is kind of trying to dress up like a Jamaican person. Bantu knots highlight the fine line between cultural appropriation and appreciation. And I think Black people are appreciating it right now, because there's a lot of loss to deal with at the moment. African Americans make up 27% of the Postal Service, twice their share of the overall workforce. So some worry privatization of the agency would hit African American communities especially hard. Well, yes, no shit, because African American communities are sheltered from some part of racism when the federal government is their employer, because the federal government, whilst imperfect, and particularly under a Trump administration is very imperfect. Federal government has habitually been the agent for reducing some of the harms of racism and some of the more egregious inequalities in American society. Federal institutions such as the Supreme Court brought about the Brown versus Board decision in 1952 was it 1954, when segregation was legislated against in the Supreme Court. Of course, it wasn't removed from people's hearts. People's hearts still endorsed segregation, and there was a lot of conflict to work through as part of the process of allowing Black children to avail themselves of the same taxpayer resources that their parents' taxes paid for, but that only white children were benefiting from to that extent. And veterans are disproportionately employed by the Postal Service as well, because government is not inherently bad and private companies are not inherently good. And that false judgment has its roots in too many people's brains. And I hope that current circumstances are changing it. And I hope that we're all engaged in enough educational efforts that we can change that very self-defeating commitment to libertarian ideas that just arbitrarily and inherently despise government. And I shouldn't say arbitrarily, because there's a very strong motivation that's driven that despising of federal government, and that driver is racism. Powerful people, powerful, wealthy people working behind the scenes for decades to seek to undo the Brown versus Board decision, to seek to have something that sounds innocuous, parent choice, instituted. So you have vouchers to use government money to send your children to whatever schools you feel like. And if you feel like an all-white school for your children, you can use your government-funded voucher to pay for that school. There's been infiltration of economics departments in universities across the United States of people who want to roll back social progress and are very committed to that. They might call themselves racial realists, they might call themselves anti-government or libertarian, but their driver is to not pay taxes. They don't want their money, to be distributed towards people who they see as lesser. They don't value African American lives. They don't concede that African Americans pay taxes and deserve to benefit from those taxes. They don't concede any positive character attributes for Black people because they are unequivocally racist and incapable of engaging with the reality of character diversity and also the love that Black Americans have brought to this nation that originally kidnapped, enslaved, brutalized, and exploited them and stole their labor from them, made America into a global economic superpower at their expense. Because it wasn't just the slave owners who made money at the expense of the forced labor and chattel slavery of Black Americans. It was all adjacent industries. If you get cheap cotton because you don't pay for labor, you can make cloth that's cheaper. That savings of not paying for the people who are doing the bulk of the physically demanding work that initiates the process of creating products. All adjacent industries are benefiting from this cheaper price. Kevin's asking us to pray for your state because are you from Kenosha, Kevin? Or you're just near Kenosha? No, it's illegal to contribute to a campaign. It's illegal, for example, to be Paul Manafort accepting help from a Kremlin official and handing over your Benedict Arnold papers of your internal polling documents to a Kremlin agent. That's illegal. That's violating campaign finance law. It's not illegal to commentate on a political election from another country. Not at all. Thank you, Clayton. Much obliged. Nice to see you. No, you didn't miss too much, I don't think, Leslie. And yes, she's got my back. It's not illegal to participate in educational commentary. Yes, it's illegal to accept campaign dollars or things of value, such as a whole parallel campaign team in Russia, a whole parallel campaign operation for Trump to help Trump get elected and to undermine support for Hillary Clinton. Ardmore thinks it would be a great day for a Hamilton hit, and Kevin's about 20 minutes drive from Kenosha. I would stay away if I were you. Yes. Hi, Alan. You've joined Twitch. You're so good at mastering all different types of social media. I'm sorry about your tremors today, and I hope you still are deriving satisfaction from listening, even if it's hard to type. I know you're there. I see you. Of course, and I don't get any notifications if people drop in and out, so never feel any compunction about, you don't have to let me know. That's okay. If I see comments from you, I'm always happy to respond. All right, so veterans and African Americans will be disproportionately affected by Republican sabotage of the Postal Service, which not only has consequences for the election, but has consequences for the delivery of vital medications, bills, forms, as well as absentee ballots. I'm cheered to see that there's a trending hashtag of Scalise resign, because Scalise shared a video which doctored the voice of an activist who's dying of ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, meaning his neural junctions aren't working properly. He's having decreasing control over his own body as time progresses, but he's been a fierce advocate for healthcare for Americans and for universal job guarantees as well, which do look a little more sensible as Americans continue to lose their jobs as a pandemic continues to ravage various parts of America. And we're learning now that children are increasingly being hospitalized for the condition because data on children has been harder to obtain when they were all not going to school. Now that they're mixing more because school's returning, states across America are seeing higher rates of hospitalized children. Still not at the same rates as elderly Americans. But yeah, children are very good at sharing germs. All right. Oh, did I explain what Scalise did? Yes, I didn't. They changed part of AD's speech, which is now computerized speech, that he can control a machine to produce a vocal output to represent his thoughts. And he interviewed Joe Biden, and they cut a bit from another part of AD's speech to insert it deceptively into a sentence, so it made it sound like AD asked Joe, do you support defunding the police? And Joe saying yes to that. So it was a confected sentence, and really quite an awful thing to do to a man who's already dying of ALS, and to exploit that he uses a computerized voice because that was easier for them to fiddle with and not make it sound obviously doctored, because a computer already obviously has that element of production to it in any case. I'm glad that people are calling for Scalise's resignation, although he probably won't, because Republicans in this moment are very all in with the corrupt support of power expansion of the executive branch at the expense of American democratic principles and standards and processes. So at the expense of people, at the expense of a fair distribution of power, at the expense of the exercise of voting to safeguard America from tyranny, because democracy is that gamble that with any luck, a majority of people will be able to see through a populist charlatan. And the tragedy of 2016 is that a majority of people did vote in the election against a populist charlatan. Hillary Clinton received 3 million, close to 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. But because of the vestigially racist system of the Electoral College, which tried to pacify and compromise and surrender power to slave-owning states where there were less voters and more land and more forced laborers, that the laborers themselves would not have the power to vote. The chattel slaves, the enslaved people, didn't have the power to vote, but their bodies could be used in tallies to contribute towards population counts, not counts of voters, but they could be used to give extra voting power to a state when electoral college numbers were allocated. So 3 out of every 5 slaves were counted to those tallies. Doesn't mean slaves were seen as 3/5 of a white person. No, they were 0 the worth of a white person. But 3 out of every 5 bodies could be counted towards giving that state disproportionate voting power over and above the number of actual voters with actual voting rights. So that's why still the lingering effects of that system entrenched in the Electoral College system and perpetuated that racism today, that racist concession is still continuing, giving rural states disproportionate voting power to overturn a popular vote, which means the normal safeguards against tyranny were overturned. And the fact that the majority did manage to see through a tyrant was overturned. There is a new Black American lady called Jeanette Epps serving as an expedition crew member on the International Space Station. Cool. All right. I should go to bed. Let's see. Oh, great. They're big on the doctored videos today. A 2011 video of Harry Belafonte apparently falling asleep was doctored to falsely depict Joe Biden. Oh, yep, this is a good point. The media also mimics Trump when they report that he always hits back 10 times harder. They're catering to Trump supporters who love to celebrate that performative machismo. I'm not going to call it toxic masculinity because I don't want to disparage men. I'm going to call it performative machismo. It appeals to insecure people who like to see aggression. And look, a lot of elderly people turned out to vote for Trump in a rejection of young people and social progress. That suspicion that older people often have across history, that young people are doing it all wrong, that they're making too many concessions, that they're weakening the nation, that they're too hoity-toity, lacking in work ethic, etc. Old people always think that of young people, always, across time. They'll be like these flighty young people, but that was really weaponized by Trump, who rejected the new, whose campaign was all about reverting to past greatness. Of course that appealed to older voters. Things were better in your day. They were golden. They were excellent. Men knew that they were men. Women knew that they were women. Young people knew their place. They worked harder. They were more conscientious. Then, in these mythical golden days, the inherent regressiveness of Trump campaign elements, I think, is under discussed, or maybe I just haven't read broadly enough. What do you think? Have you seen much reporting done on the catering to, the cultivating of intergenerational resentment on the part of older people towards younger people? That's not a novelty. It's always there, but Trump fanned the flames of sexism, racism, and hate for young people, resentment and suspicion of young people. And the people who say, oh, I just can't, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden, but I don't agree with him. And I always think, what is it that they don't agree with him about? And they fear the far left. They fear the idealism of the young. And that's fair. To be honest, the anarchy of some young far-left elements is very annoying and would be dangerous if they had any chance of being in power, which they don't, because sensible America picked a moderate candidate in Joe Biden, who nevertheless has the most progressive agenda of any candidate in Dem politics for decades, who is listening to people who want to do more to achieve justice, who argue persuasively and sensibly that the economy is enhanced by increased racial justice, that the more you include people and help them, actually the more they can participate in the economy. The more you actually generate spending, the more you generate local consumption, the better your economy is. And under Republicans, they've always increased the deficit. They've always given their friends too many tax breaks. They've always made the middle class then begin to disproportionately have to shoulder the burden for maintaining American infrastructure, for paying American police, nurses, hospital building, roads, airport maintenance, etc. Because Republicans have just been doing favors for rich people for a long time, paying a lot of verbal tribute to values like hard work and independence, but giving a socialist landing cushion, or the landing cushion of wealth, to the already wealthy, and making sure everybody else knowing that cushions are terrible things and you should never have them. Don't cushion your children. Don't cushion yourselves. Don't have social safety nets that's going to make you weak and lazy. Yes, we're giving big corporate subsidies to fossil fuel companies. Yes, we're giving big incentives to Amazon to work in parts of America. We're shoveling your money to them, but don't expect it back. Don't expect it back in the form of benefits for you. And we'll sell that concept to white people by saying, it's really just the black people getting all the benefits. That's what Democrats are trying to do. You wouldn't benefit from it anyway. So really just believe us when we tell you that benefits are to be hated and despised, okay? You don't want them. Because if we made benefits the law, just only black people would get them anyway, because look at those far left people. They don't like you. They don't like white people. They want to give black people things because they're insisting that slavery has repercussions that are ongoing. And that's not true, is it? You're smart enough to see that the real racism here is against white people. If that's what you think, if you're someone who agrees with the statement that white people are more likely to be discriminated against than black Americans, then you're a Trump voter. And that's what I'm here to help educate us so that we can all more persuasively communicate these messages to people, that the more inclusive your society is, the more just your society is, that these concepts are not divorced from or antithetical to economic prosperity and economic health. Yes, this is a very good point, Molly. The Family Planning Services and Population Research Act of 1970 forced sterilized almost 30% of African American women. They were deceived. They would be told that they were having other procedures like their tonsils out, but they were forcibly sterilized against their consent. And people don't know that. It's a good thing for people to learn. Yes, but also a lot of Black Americans are very tired of living with high overt levels of racism, but also covert levels of racism that they just understand are part of life and that have been under-acknowledged by others and are still under-acknowledged. People will still pretend that there aren't disproportionate numbers of Black Americans detained, frisked, interrogated, arrested, charged, convicted by not only police acting on conscious or unconscious biases, but a judicial system acting on conscious or unconscious biases. And they're sad that people have rejected that reality out of loyalty to the police force, when it doesn't make you inherently disloyal to police, although the extremes of opinion do sound very disloyal and very critical of police, but that it's a product of research conclusions to say when you have a police force that has a police union created, that there are legal concessions that have been won for police officers that have allowed them to understand that there's a greater degree of immunity available to them than there is to the general population. That a perk of the job of being a police officer, you might be exposed to more danger, but you'll be able to confer with your colleagues before you have to give a statement. You'll be able to withhold video footage for up to 30 days. You'll be able to take meal breaks when you're being questioned, etc. Yes, Joe Biden has been making some wonderful points that he absolutely does not endorse violence from the left or the right, that it's counterproductive. And I saw even Reverend Al Sharpton say that it jeopardizes the court cases of prosecutions of police officers who may have been involved in unjust extrajudicial killings of Black Americans. Because if you're trying to convince a jury that an injustice has been perpetrated, you don't want that jury associating your victimized person, your dead victimized person, or your paralyzed victimized person with images of rioting and property destruction. Americans don't like rioting and property destruction. They support property. They're very much in favor of the preservation of property. And most people are fine with that, but African Americans have struggled a little bit with that commitment to preserving property when it's been the case that their lives are undervalued. And rioting and looting has affected Black businesses as well. And Joe Biden and Reverend Al Sharpton talk about that and the unfairness of inflicting collective punishment for racism in general on individuals, on families, on small businesses. When we have Periscope trolls, we get to block them if they're really awful. Oh yes, local police departments would be openly working with fascist militia groups. It's a symptom of fascism. Fascism often venerates authority, having rule of law that doesn't apply to the elites, who violate them, and whose supporters often get exhilarated by norm breaking and law breaking, but laws have to apply to the other people. Yes, the officers thanked the militia, but also in Portland, police officers directed the pro-Trump rally to drive through Portland rather than adhere to their original plan of driving around Portland. So there's been people in different areas of America where police departments have been collaborating with Trump supporters or with the militia. Yes, and the police officers thanked the militia for what they were doing. And that's a bad idea because you shouldn't endorse or condone a 17-year-old policing a used car lot. You shouldn't do it. It's not worth it. The loss of life, the civil unrest is not worth saying, oh, you're doing a good job, you little 17-year-old with your AR-15. That's the definition of unsafe, is having a 17-year-old roam the streets with an AR-15. That is inherently unsafe, and consequences of that night support it. 17-year-old was chased, not able to de-escalate anything, just dropped to his knees and shot people who were trying to take his weapon away, presumably out of an interest in public safety and not allowing him to kill any more people. Remember, there was a Waffle House shooting and a man disarmed the shooter. He sustained an injury to his arm, but he was able with his bare hands to take the weapon away. He didn't use that weapon to shoot the mass murderer who killed multiple people at the Waffle House. He was celebrated as a hero. The police came and arrested the mass shooter, but you can't say, hey, the mass shooter would have been justified in shooting James, whatever his name is, because James was trying to disarm the shooter. It's like, no, once you hear reports that someone with an assault rifle has shot someone already, you can disarm them. People who disarm people with semi-automatic or or assault rifles are usually trying to protect people. Yep, the used cars lot said the militia had not been invited. No, they were just organized via Facebook. They wanted to do it. Fascism invites people to seek glory and join militias. All right, I'm going to try and share something that I think is quite comical. Let's see. Oh, yeah, this is great. Put this as my title. One fun tip is to begin all his tweets with "Mummy. Mummy, why are Republicans allowing the Democrats to have ridiculous post office hearings on Saturday and Monday, just before and during our convention? Mummy, let them hold them now, during their convention." I don't know, that's going to be determined by a court of law, I guess. But when you violate the law to cross state lines with a weapon that you're not legally allowed to have because you're 17, it makes it more difficult to make a case that you should be there defending yourself. It's not like defending yourself in your home. You've left your home, breaking the law to do so by being 17 with that type of weaponry. And yeah, the right's saying all manner of things. I don't give them a great deal of credibility for what they say. They've said that they would like to make that man president. All right, so we're going to try this now as an exercise. We're going to try putting the word "mummy" in front of Trump tweets. All right. Oh my gosh, it is going to be so much better looking at these tweets with the word "mummy" in front. Yes, let's put the word "mummy" in front of troll comments as well. "Mummy, orange man bad." He did. He crossed state lines from Illinois to Wisconsin. Right? Is that? Yeah, Wisconsin is Kenosha. He did. Well, he tried to surrender to police, but the police ignored him, so he gave up trying and went home to his mummy. Although his mother drove him to Wisconsin in the first place. I wonder if he had to get a lift from her back as well. All right, so "Mummy, the radical left and governors of cities where this crazy violence is taking place have lost control of their movement." "Mummy, I've been getting really good polls, some over 50%, except for one fake poll done by ABC News." Oh, and I'll go back to that because it's not true, actually. And the big news, the poll news of the moment, is that military people have 60% of them are not liking Trump at the moment. He's got a strong disapproval rating amongst surveyed military Americans. So here is how unpopular Donald Trump is as a picture. 55.6% disapprove and 40.7% approve of him. And that's averaged polls, weighted for quality, recency, sample size, and partisan lean. That's good. That's a fancy way to process all those different polls. And you can see there was this big increase in approval and decrease in disapproval around March, when people were like, oh, let's give Trump the benefit of the doubt. We've got to rally around the flag effect from this crisis. All right. I do find it much more palatable to read Trump tweets when we're saying "mummy." Mummy, if I didn't insist on having the National Guard activate and go into Kenosha, Wisconsin, there would be no Kenosha right now. Mummy just had a wonderful conversation with my friend, Prime Minister Abe Shinzo of Japan. Mummy, when is slow Joe Biden going to criticize the anarchist thugs and agitators? Joe Biden has been very critical of violence. All right. Well, we're done with that exercise. It was momentarily amusing. Yes, she may very well be charged as an accomplice. I don't know if she drove him home. She drove him there. She drove him to Kenosha. Yes, right-wing accounts have raised a lot of money, over, I think, $225,000. And it was illegal for him to be in possession of a weapon. And she is an accomplice, yes. Well, she's an accomplice according to how we view her actions. How a court views her actions is a separate matter. Okay. I want to show you something else, which is a comedian. Mm-hmm. All right, so I don't have it. That's okay. I do have something. South Korea is even reimposing restrictions on restaurants and gyms because they've got some increase in the rise of COVID-19 in the middle of their COVID-19 numbers. So reopening the economy is not a one-way path forward. People open and close, and there might be an ongoing pattern of that for a while. But still, they're just being very cautious. How's the stock market doing right now? Oh, and Trump's campaign has accepted money from a virulent anti-Semite. I'll show you that. His website asserted that the Jew is a literal child of Satan and is the natural enemy of the white race, the children of God. Well, gosh, I'm not surprised very much at all that Trump would accept money from somebody like that. I'm going to check the stock market. The volatility index is 24.62. What's the overall pattern today? The SPY went down a bit but went up a bit. Okay, so today is not the day that it's crashing that much, is it? And Tesla's gone up bloody 10%. Weird how much people love Tesla. But it does seem likely that a major crash is on its way. We'll see if how long they can postpone that crash for. And in the meantime, $3 trillion worth of taxpayers' money has gone to jacking up the Dow. That's a great expression. 1995 AVS fan. A lot of money. And you wish you could raise money for your daughter who wants to go to law school. She's 60K in, is that 60K in debt? Yes, they have prioritized the Dow, funnily enough, because that's what Donald Trump rests his claim of economic competence on, his false claim of economic competence, because Trump lies to people about what tariffs are and how they work, and he created a manufacturing recession prior to COVID that was bringing the whole country into recession. And in fact, the whole American economy has been retroactively deemed to have entered a recession in February of 2020. And I see so few media outlets report on that or deal with it, that it wasn't a COVID recession. There was a recession in February. And that's because there was a manufacturing recession in October of 2019 with spillover effects in the transport and storage industries. And it was spreading. So this is very under-discussed, that Trump should not be beating Joe Biden in any sensible matchup of economic competence, because he's terrible with the economy. And it's one of those unconsciously racist things that too many Americans deny a Black Democratic president credit for the economic recovery that he sustained over an 8-year term. Well, let's say for 7 years of his term in a recovery economy, and that graph went upwards. And Donald Trump allowed that graph to continue upwards, all the while taking credit for the heights it reached in its just unbroken upwards trajectory. Student loan debt, even with a full ride scholarship for undergraduate to pay for living expenses and books. That's well done for your daughter for getting a full ride scholarship for undergraduate. The thing about scholastic debt in the United States seems to be that you have to pay compound interest, not simple interest, which is such a burden that you could be paying off this increasing amount of interest for so long whilst hardly even making a dent in the principal. So your debt just keeps getting bigger and bigger as you struggle to get a job good enough to pay off your debt to enough of a degree that you can get ahead of it without it swelling exorbitantly like some kind of a blob character from a horror movie. Yes, I think every time, with the exception of possibly Jimmy Carter, the economy has improved under Democratic presidents, and the deficit has significantly increased under Republican presidents. Yes, the market ballooned up, but the Fed was injecting $3 trillion of your money into the economy. Let me say something, and I'm definitely going. What if I search Grant? All right. There's a comedian who offered for people to post to him any historical villain, the name of any villain, and he would use conservative logic to justify the actions of that person. Service members. I just have to hold this up to show you. How well can you see this graph? No, too much reflection. Oh, well, the red line is increasing increasing disapproval of Trump that was at 37% in 2016. And then his approval rate amongst service members was 46%. That's just completely reversed position. So now approval of Trump is at 37.8%, and his disapproval is at 49.9% amongst currently serving service members, which is so important because they have to have Fox News play all the time in their bases. It's not an option. You can't get away from it. So there's some form of reality that is too intrusive, even for service members to avoid, exposed as they are to compulsory viewings of Fox News. $45,000 was the debt a year ago. So the compound interest is swelling her debt before she can get ahead of it. And that's not fair. I don't think you need Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders to say, let's just evaporate all the debt. How about somebody with the foresight to say simple interest instead of compound interest would remove the oppressive nature of that debt burden? Jimmy Carter got screwed by a secret deal the Republicans had with Iran. Was that the Iran-Contra affair? Okay. Oh, and the other bit of good news is that hundreds of thousands of voters who didn't cast a ballot in 2016 have applied to vote by mail in the 2020 election. And Democrats have a significant advantage amongst those voters everywhere we're tracking. All right, well, I'm going to go find that man who made that remark so I can show you. Okay, check that out. See those blue lines? I'll make it bigger so we can read the states as well. So there's Missouri, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Virginia, Ohio. What's MD? And then IA. That's Iowa, isn't it? So look at that. In every single state, so many hundreds of thousands of voters who didn't cast a ballot in 2016 are going to vote now. They are very motivated. Oh, and he says that they're soon going to have numbers for Texas as well. How fabulous. It's reassuring. Trump sabotages the Postal Service, but what he's probably trying to do as well is just discourage people from voting and encourage Trump loyalists to ramp up their efforts to discount any votes that have anything wrong. So everybody just has to work really hard to be accurate with their absentee ballots if they're using them, to use the inner envelope to make sure every box is completed that needs to be completed. Her interest rate is 10.5%. What? How is the interest rate 10.5%? Extraordinary. You're trying to get your 20-year-old registered in Colorado and she needs a driver's license or PIC ID. Well, there might be organizations that can help. Although I think there's mostly organizations trying to help African American people get the necessary ID. But you know what? Let's Google it. I'll Google it before I see you next time in case there's any Democratic organizations that help people get through those obstacles successfully. Joe Biden's speaking live. Well, I'm going to let you guys go and watch that instead. That's an important speech. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Oh, yes, Pfizer, Raytheon, and ExxonMobil have been kicked off the Dow, haven't they? And it sucks that they allow minors to sign a contract and she can't drive, so she needs some other PIC ID. Love you too, Leslie. So lovely to talk to you all. I have a question for you, everybody. I am going to be invited to be one of 4 participants in an Australian chat. That's not going to be as interesting for you, is it? It's not something I'm hosting. It's on another platform, on whatever platform they're using. I'm just very excited to be like a foreign correspondent guest. But yes, I might let you know when it airs if you have any interest in doing it. I'm doing that on Wednesday. Yes, you love Joe. So do I. I'm very happy he's the candidate. Thank you so much, everybody. Good luck to your daughter getting some ID so she can register to vote. Alan would like to see it. Paul's expressing interest as well. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Peace out. Indeed, Joe. Not Joe. I'm thinking about Joe, but peace out, Bob. Thank you, Molly. Take care of yourselves and each other. All the best. Thanks, Leslie. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, all the moderators, Jeff and Paul and Bob. Bob, I appreciate you. You don't have to answer to me for levels of involvement. I just noticed that you're there and that you say hello. It's all good. Thanks, 1995 fan person. Thanks, Alan, for texting me on Patreon. For anybody who doesn't know, I do have a Patreon account. Oh, your wife is sick. I'm so sorry. I hope she gets better soon. Agnostic prayers for your wife, Bob. Hammerstrand, thank you as well. You're having a bad time. Yeah, I'm sure all the group send out helpful thoughts, like just so that you know you have our support. Yeah, good thoughts. Good thoughts. Have fun listening to Joe, everybody who does that. And in any case, I'll hope to see you again sooner rather than later. Peace out.